Yeah, my name is Eike Roswag-Klinge, and I'm the initiator of the Natural Building Lab at Technical University here in Berlin. In my long term, I'm architect, and I have an office what is called ZRS Architekten-Ingenieure, where we are working with natural materials, things we do also at the university. Actually, we don't really know, because that's a process, I would say. But for us at the moment, we believe that we have to change resources. We have to work with new materials, like natural materials, like timber, earth, bamboo, etc. And we have to get into something what is alive, what could stay inside of the planetary boundaries. So, we have to rethink our whole life, and architecture is a big part of it. Like 50% of the energy we use is just to run buildings, just to have a good climate, indoor conditions to live here in the north. And 50% of our garbage is coming from the building sector. And that's loads of resources, fossil resources we use, and we have to work on all that in parallel. So we believe it's a process with society, and so sustainable construction is, let's say, a process. Yeah, resource adaptive architecture is at least an architecture what is using less materials, let's say. So that's number one. So if we reduce our footprints of buildings or the space we need, so if I have, now people live in around 50 square meters in Germany, and for 2050 the German agency on environment says in 2050 we have to live on 40 square meters. So that's the first adaptation to resources we have. And the second thing is that we have to, leave the fossil age, and we have to change into adaptive, climate adaptive and resource adaptive materials, what is at least regrowing materials or materials which are reusable and circular. And I think that's the adaptation we need to find into our planetary boundaries if we use the right materials. Yeah, our behavior has to change because we will learn to live in consume a lot. We learn to live based on fossil resources. So that's the age we are living in. And the next age is something where we have to completely change our behavior. We have to eat different, we have to live different. And I think the biggest point is we have to reduce our consume. And so we have to have smaller flats, we have to do not travel too much, don't use airplanes, have a different way of eating, etc. And that also belongs then to cities and to buildings. I think that's the big process we are facing now. I think change has to be in any part of our society. So everybody has to be on a way and go and move. And what I believe is that we have a very quick process together with society. So something like real labs or Reallabore, how we call it in German, or live labs, where we can just design, build and produce in the same step, let's say, to get speed into change. And I think that's the amazing process we are now facing too. What is also a big difficulty, but everybody has to leave his comfortable zone where we have, as researchers, we can, design a screw or a nail for about 10 years. No? That is how we usually do it, through different steps, and how to get it into D norms, etc., etc. But usually if we continue with this path, we will immediately learn that this screw will be, history, because we need another screw in 10 years, because that's quite sure. No? So we need to get other solutions, how to join research and action in a way to get into a future. It starts with the design. And for us, what we learned, especially from our work in the Global South, where we have been working with remote communities in the villages, we learned to interact together and decide together and produce together. So there's a quick change of very deep linked interaction between the users, the people, let's say, and designers and engineers and experts, and to speed up the process. And then if it comes to production, so we believe in something what is reducing all that and going back to basics. And our special experience in the Natural Building Lab, or also the office, the background I'm coming from, is to work with vapor active, climate adaptive materials. And then we can reduce technology. We can have, so the building itself is performing well with people. For example, earth is very, very good in the hot climate, or even in our climate. Or natural fibers as insulation materials is perfect in Germany. No? Timber construction, there's hundreds of years of tradition. Yeah? It's going back to the ages back when people started settling. They started building with timber and earth. We're getting back to these simple solutions, and I think that's the way building would appear in the future. No? Something what is low tech, simple made. Yeah, could be handmade, could also be industrialized, produced. No? Modern timber construction with very quick and straightforward. But in a way, from the thinking, it should be something what is very simple. And the other level is that we have, with our whole society, with all our industries, we have to come into a circular economy. And especially building sector, if you think about concrete construction, you have to demolish it down to gravel to reuse it, and that's a nightmare. And if you believe in, if you see or look at timber construction, the traditional Fachwerkhaus in Germany, that was joints with timber, very simple, added, and if they had to put it somewhere, they just removed the joints and they put it somewhere and rebuild it. And this is the way of thinking. We have to come back and to keep the resources in use or reusable. And actually, we just like to be on that level of reuse or permanent use or reuse flexibility, and not to recycle. Then we start putting things down to a smaller level, or to destroy materials, to remold them. So we like to have a circular economy, be a circular building sector where we can still keep everything in a loop and and use other resources than we do at the moment. We're not talking about Berlin, we're talking about Berlin and Brandenburg. What is the, this area around Berlin? Because there's deep links between these two parts, even if there are two different governments ruling and fighting against each other. But we should have this view on that area at one. And we call it, in a way, if you look on the material or resource level, we call it a resource region. No? So there's a potential of people housing or people living somewhere, and that has a potential in some areas. If you look at cities like Cottbus, there's a huge potential for young creative people, because that's cheap, there's space, and then this kind of core could develop for the future in other areas. No? And we could link the building sector, timber, and Berlin in one. No? If you look at the Schumacher Quartier at the moment, what is a huge development on the old airport Tegel. There's a vision now to have the climate adaptation of our Berlin forests, what is not much, but the Berlin forest inside of the city. They have a lot of timber, and they believe they could do the whole Schumacher Quartier, what is 5,000 flat, out of the timber what we are harvesting because of climate adaptation of our forests. So. And all these processes could be, very good showcases for the future, and that has this deep links. The things we are working on in our climate change center at the TU Berlin, where we are interacting between Brandenburg and Berlin. And we have these kind of what we call the Bauhütte 4.0, what is kind of a building future lab, what is hosted in Tegel on Schumacher Quartier. And these links, they are perfect, and there's a lot of work, a lot of process to be done to think this as a whole area and not, Berlin at one as a city and Brandenburg as a country, because Brandenburg around Berlin is not a country. It's an urban sprawl or something, and we have to think all that together and develop it together. And if I add one more sentence, if you look what we do here at the moment, if you look at our students, so they, for example, work with garbage. They started to use used timber beams, which usually are ending up as firewood for these waste treatment plants, where they heat up with this garbage from the construction site. But they started cleaning these elements and to do something new. So they have done a little pavilion, done of all these small little elements they found, and have put it here through these nice machines, and then they had new timber elements, and then they have additive structure, and then they had a kind of framework and roofed construction. So they were experimenting a lot what they can do from construction waste. And then the interesting thing, for example, they found out these vegetable boxes, these cardboard boxes, which are in every shop at the moment, and they got wasted like thousands of them every day in Berlin. And they made a kind of a block wall out of that. They call it like the urban straw ball construction. And then they have paper recycling inside as an insulation, then have glued it together with advertisement posters, because that has glue already. You can put water on and reuse it, and they have reused all that materials, and they have built walls out of it. And that's quite experimental for the time being, but that's really trying to interact with the future. No? And then we are working with earth, and we have some bamboo projects abroad, so working on housing in Bangladesh, etc., with earth and timber, with earth and bamboo. And I think that's where we're trying to, be part of a future built environment or a future society. Well, there are not so many initiatives, especially in Berlin, which are focusing on sustainable construction. I think there's a little bit in the universities at the moment, like our lab. There is this kind of governmental idea to build schools in timber. I think that is getting into a rollout. That's quite a step, but it's so far to go. So to change this whole urban context, to traffic, all the building sector, and so many things to change. And I think at the moment nobody is trying to touch this huge complex situation. And I think we need a program where we will cover all these aspects of change, and energy and materials, etc., to get it into a big picture and then try to focus on. Yeah, well, if you look on a future city or the future vision of Berlin, I believe it will be climate adaptive, so we will have a green city, we have green facades, green roofs, and then we will reduce our traffic, we will reduce our cars. Nobody needs a car in Berlin. You can reach every point with a bike or with public transport. So we put all out of these cars. We have loads of parking areas in the streets and etc., at the shopping malls, etc. And we start putting kind of parks and urban farms, etc., onto that. We can build here and there, but that should be really adaptive and green for the future. And then we transform, we remix our squares. No? So now the center is very, kind of areas very office-driven, business-driven. And I think we should not, let people travel half an hour or an hour every day to get to work. We should bring these things together. The modernism has put these functions away because we had industry, dirty industries were put out of the city, and we had people somewhere else, and we had these beautiful cars. And now we know that's all bullshit. We can bring green, new production back into the cities. We can have people working and living together. And we have to, for sure, take care about prices. We have to, speculation. That's a different topic. It's nothing what I'm really working on. But then we have, people just do anything with a bicycle, and then we could have a totally different vision of a city.